Just a little bit about us at CAEL. We are a national membership-driven organization. We are just north of 50 years old now. We celebrated our 50th anniversary at our national conference in New Orleans back last October. We put the adult learner and their communities at the heart of everything that we do. But how we go about doing it is in a rather ecosystemic way. We really work in close partnership with, as you can see right here today, post-secondary educational institutions. We work very closely with workforce development boards and other workforce organizations. We align ourselves with mission-aligned funders. Work very closely with economic development organizations, chambers of commerce, and of course, work very closely with employers and industry. Students who earn credit for prior learning have, across the board, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of economic background, they persist at higher rates. There is a boost to persistence rates and graduation rates that comes from earning credit for prior learning. We also found, and this question had come up earlier, that students who earn credit for prior learning earn more residential credits. On average, almost 18 more residential credits than students who do not earn credit for prior learning. And that makes sense. It's a logical extension. If the students are persisting at greater rates, if they're being retained at greater rates, they're going to take more of your residential credit hours. Prior learning assessment is the actual work that goes on primarily by faculty, and that's what we're about in this workshop. Prior learning assessment is the evaluation of a student's knowledge and skills to determine whether the award of college credit is warranted. Credit for prior learning is what the student is actually seeking. So what we like to think of is that credit for prior learning is the student-facing language in all of this. Because if you think about it, that term assessment can sometimes be intimidating to a student, particularly a returning student. And it can be intimidating to us sometimes. They're not really seeking assessment. They're seeking college credit and ultimately a credential. So the assessment of prior learning is what goes on behind the scenes. It's the work that's being done, like I said, primarily by faculty. The credit for that prior learning is what the student is seeking. Credit for prior learning really challenges, in some ways, what we think of in terms of the relationship between teaching and learning. It encourages us to think about the idea that learning can take place anywhere. It can take place in our classrooms, in our laboratories, in our studios. It can take place in the workplace. It certainly takes place in the military. It can take place in volunteer organizations. It can take place through online non-credit instruction. But I'll get to the point here where it becomes critically important, and that is the work that you and your faculty colleagues do when it comes to assessing that learning and assessing that experience. Those of us in higher education have been involved in assessment now for decades. I was very fortunate. I came of age as a faculty member in the early 90s when assessment became a very, very important part of how we went about getting accreditation. All of the major regional accreditors were developing a focus in assessment. Assessment is really nothing more complicated than systematizing the work that academic departments do on more or less formal or informal bases all the time. You're always talking about what's working and what doesn't work. All that assessment does is to formalize that, to systematize that. So what you're really about is getting an appraisal of the knowledge, the skills, the attitudes, the dispositions of your students and mapping it onto the learning outcomes that you expect to see as articulated in your course syllabi. So CPL at its core is based on college level learning. How is that defined? By you. You're the ones who define what is college level learning for CUNY and for your individual college, because you and your faculty colleagues develop the curriculum, develop the courses, develop the learning outcomes. So that's really what that is all about in the end. That credit for prior learning is college level credit that is only awarded if the student demonstrates that they have mastered the learning outcomes that constitute college level learning. And you are the ones who make that consideration, no one else. Institutional assessments. These are assessment tools that you and your faculty colleagues develop. They are linked directly to the learning outcomes in your course syllabi, and they are, by design, comprehensive. They have to be, because this is the student's one opportunity to demonstrate that they have mastered the learning outcomes for the entire course. So by their very nature, they need to be comprehensive. We like to think of these institutional assessments, these challenge assessments, as falling into these broad buckets. Like I said at the outset, there's going to be some overlap here, and that's fine. And we'll address that as they come up. Summative course exams that, of course, are very comprehensive, and they can take the form of any kind of exam that you have experience in developing. They can be multiple choice, true, false, fill in the blank, short answer, essay, some combination thereof. Get into some of the details of that here in a bit. Written portfolios. I'm a big fan of portfolios, but they come at a cost. And that cost is largely time. Time on the part of the student, time on the part of the faculty member to do the assessment. Skills demonstrations. There are going to be some disciplines where skills demonstrations might be the only way of assessing the prior learning, or one of two ways or multiple ways of doing it. Sometimes you just need to see the student's ability either in a studio or in a laboratory. This is very often the case in institutions that have culinary programs, and you have somebody coming in with experience in that industry. You want credit for this particular course, right? Let's get in the kitchen and see what you're capable of doing. And of course, oral interviews, one of the oldest means in human history, actually, of assessing learning.